Hello, my darlings. Mother Raven here. Today I've brought you more animal ghost stories collected by Elliott O'Donnell. Today we'll discuss dogs. The Gray Dog of Redacted House, Birmingham. According to a story current in the Midlands, a house in Birmingham, near the Roman Catholic Cathedral, was once very badly haunted. A family who took up their abode in it in the 80s complained of hearing all sorts of uncanny sounds, such as screams and sighs, coming from a room behind the kitchen. On one occasion, the tenant's wife, on entering the sitting room, was almost startled out of her senses at seeing, standing before the fireplace, the figure of a tall, stout man with a large, gray dog by his side. What was so alarming about the man was his face. It was apparently a mere blob of flesh without any features in it. The lady screamed out, whereupon there was a terrific crash, as if all the crockery in the house had been suddenly clashed on the stone floor. And a friend of the lady's, attracted to the spot by the noise, saw two clouds of vapor, one resembling a man and the other a dog, which, after hovering over the hearth for several seconds, finally dispersed altogether. A gas fitter, when working in the house, saw the same figures no less than 9 times, and so distinctly that he was able to give a detailed description of both the man and the dog. The house seems to have been well known in Birmingham, and was certainly standing as recently as 1885. Many theories were advanced as to its history, the one gaining most credence being that it was occupied in 1829 by a man who supplied the medical students with human bodies. It was noticed at the time that many people who were seen to enter the house in the company of the owner were never seen to leave it, which accords well with the theory of resurrection men. No suggestion has been offered to account for the animal, which may very easily have been the phantom of the murderer's dog, or, what is rather less likely, the dog of one of his numerous victims. Anyhow, explanation or no explanation, the fact remains the house was haunted in the manner described, and F. Gray, a Warwick chief constable, on his Recollections, published in 1821, alludes to it. The Dog in the Cupboard. Miss Prettyman, whom I met some years ago in Cornwall, told me she once lived in a house in Westmoreland that was haunted by the apparition of a large dog enveloped in bluish glow, which apparently emanated from within it. The dog, whilst appearing in all parts of the house, invariably vanished in a big cupboard at the back of the hall staircase. Miss Prettyman, her family, several of their visitors, and the servants all saw the same phantasm, and were, perhaps, more frightened by the suddenness of its advent than by its actual appearance. The theory was that it was the ghost of some dog that had been cruelly done to death, possibly by starvation, in the cupboard. How the ghost of a dog saved life. When I was a boy, an elderly friend of mine, Miss Lafanu, narrated to me an anecdote which impressed me much. It was to this effect. Miss Lafanu was walking one day along a very lonely country lane, when she suddenly observed an enormous Newfoundland dog following in her wake for several yards behind. Being very fond of dogs, she called out to it in a caressing voice, and endeavored to stroke it. To her disappointment, however, it dodged aside and repeated the maneuver every time she tried to touch it. At length, losing patience, she desisted and resumed her walk, the dog still following her. In this fashion they went on until they came to a particularly dark part of the road, where the branches of the trees almost met overhead, and there was a pool of stagnant, slimy water, suggestive of great depth. On one side of the hedge was high, but on the other there was a slight gap leaning into the thick spiny. Miss Le Fanu never visited the spot alone after dusk, and had been warned against it even in daytime. As she drew near to it, everything that she had ever heard about it flashed across her mind, and she was more than once on the verge of turning back, when the sight of the big friendly dog plodding behind her reassured her. She pressed on. Just as she came to the gap, there was a loud snapping of twigs, and to her horror, 2 tramps with singularly sinister faces sprang out, and were about to strike her with their bludgeons, when the dog, uttering a low, ominous growl, dashed at them. In an instant, the expression of murderous joy in their eyes died out. One of abject terror took its place, and dropping their weapons, they fled, as if the very salvation of their souls depended on it. As may be imagined, Miss Le Fanu lost no time in getting home, and the first thing she did on arriving there was to go into the kitchen and order the cook to prepare at once a thoroughly good meal for her gallant rescuer, the Newfoundland dog, which she had shut up secretly in the backyard, with the laughing remark, "There, you can't escape me now." Judge of her astonishment, however, when on the return the dog had gone. As the walls of the backyard were 12 feet high, and the doors had been shut all the while, no one having passed through them, it was impossible for the animal to have escaped, and the only interpretation that could possibly be put on the matter was that the dog was superphysical, a conclusion that was subsequently confirmed by the experience of various other people. As a result of exhaustive inquiries, Miss Le Fanu eventually learned that many years before, on the very spot where the tramps had leaped on her, a peddler and his Newfoundland dog had been discovered, murdered. This story being true, then, there is one more link in the chain of evidence to show that dogs, as well as men, have spirits, and spirits that can, on occasion at least, perform deeds of practical service. The phantom dog seen on Sauterfell. Miss Harriet Martineau, in her English Lakes, refers to a certain strange phenomena seen from time to time on Sauterfell. In 1745, for example, a Mr. Wren and his servant saw, simultaneously, a man and a dog pursuing some horses along a razor-like ridge of rocks, on which it was obviously impossible for any ordinary being to gain a bare foothold, let alone walk. They watched the figures until the latter suddenly vanished, when Mr. Wren and his servants, thinking perhaps the man, dog, and horses had really fallen over the cliff, went to look for them. They searched everywhere, but despite their vigilance, nothing was to be found. And, convinced at last that what they had seen was something superphysical, they came away mystified, and no doubt somewhat frightened. There is no suggestion to make here, other than the manifestations may have been the phantasms of a man, dog, and horses, that some former date had been killed, either accidentally or purposely, in or near that spot. Dogs seen before a death. Mrs. Crow, I wonder if she's related. In her Night Side of Nature, mentions the case of a young lady named P, redacted, who saw a big black dog twice suddenly appear and disappear by her side immediately before the death of her mother. In The Unseen World, a story is also told of the phantasm of a big black dog appearing on the bed of a Cornish child doomed to die shortly afterwards. The same dog invariably manifesting itself before the death of any member of the child's family. There are so many cases of a similar kind. One hears of them nearly everywhere one goes, that one is led to believe some of them, at least, must be true. There is no more reason to believe all ghost storytellers are liars than there are to believe all parsons are liars. And this being so, additional proof is afforded of the continuation of the dog's life after death. For these family canine ghosts are more than probably the phantasms of dogs that once belonged to families, maybe centuries ago, and met their fate in some cruel and unnatural manner. Well, my darlings, I hope you've enjoyed this little group of tales. I certainly believe animals have the same sort of soul that we do. So quoth this raven.